It is 4:13 p.m. Wednesday, February 4th. Just over an hour ago, Liam, or maybe even just less than an hour ago, the Los Angeles Kings make a trade right before the NHL trade freeze that was set to occur before the Olympic break, which is tonight is the second to last night of hockey. And the Kings go out and acquire Artemi Panarin from the New York Rangers. And if you want to throw that trade up on the board, Liam, they go out and give up a couple picks, a couple conditional picks, and Liam Greentree to secure Artemi Panarin for what is hoping for them to be a very deep playoff run. They also have the New York Rangers retain 50% of Artemi Panarin's cap, which sits at just about $5.8 million of his just over $11.5 million cap hit. So now the Kings go out and acquire this player who is obviously having a fantastic season before the Rangers decided to sit him for 3 games before the break. The Kings are obviously looking to bolster their roster and actually add some firepower up front. And I think that they do that. But Lee, I'm going to ask you, at what cost? Because the Kings obviously go out and give up Greentree. They gave up 2 conditional picks. And obviously we could say from our standpoint, it doesn't seem like a lot. But not only did they acquire his big cap hit, but they also go out and extend him for 2 years at $11 million a year. So Liam, from an outsider perspective, in your humble opinion, what are your thoughts on this trade, and how do you think it looks for the Rangers and the Kings?
I think it's an underwhelming trade overall on both sides in terms of what each team got. Last 4 years now, the Kings have been bounced in the first round by the Oilers. So obviously they needed to make a move in order to boost up and bolster their roster, as well as with Kopitar retiring after the season. So they're making that final push there. I wouldn't say they have an open window, but that window is closing with Doughty getting really old and Anze Kopitar retiring, like I just mentioned. They get a player in Liam Greentree, who was a first-round pick by the LA Kings, 26th overall in the 2024 NHL draft. He currently has 45 points in 34 games for the Windsor Spitfires in the OHL, had 119 points in 64 games last season for Windsor in the OHL, had an underwhelming World Junior, really didn't get much playing time. So, I mean, not the greatest prospect, but it's definitely a decent return for a guy who publicly said he was not going to be signing with the Rangers unless he got a bigger contract. And even the Rangers announcing probably like over a month ago now that they were planning on moving on from him and not signing him. So, like I said, a little bit underwhelming, but Panarin goes to a team that's in a very weak division and needs to make something happen because a retool will be coming soon if they have no success in the near future.
To go along with what you just said, there were a few teams that were rumored to be interested in Artemi Panarin, as you could probably assume. Those teams include the Florida Panthers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, so those 2 teams out in Florida, as well as the Washington Capitals, a bit of the Edmonton Oilers. Some teams were, like the Sharks, were rumored to also go out and potentially get Artemi Panarin. But at the end of the day, it is the LA Kings that land him. I think it does make sense as a landing spot. But what's also interesting is that Panarin really had a massive say in this trade. Obviously, he does have a full no-move clause. So he really did dictate where he wanted to go. And apparently the only destination that he was interested in going to was the LA Kings. So that makes it really, really easy for the Kings. Very, very difficult for the Rangers to actually get a return. But I think what's more interesting than anything is that this Kings team that has met the Edmonton Oilers in the first round of the playoffs for as long as I could remember and has had difficulty getting out of that phase, is probably in that phase in their, I guess you could say, in their situation where their team on paper is probably not as strong as it once was.
Yeah.
Obviously, the last couple of years, they've had a lot of depth. I would say now their team on paper is not nearly as deep as it once was. They've obviously struggled with guys like Byfield, who have not produced nearly as much as they've liked, especially this season. Kempe has been a bit underwhelming. Kopitar is obviously aging out a bit. They've had guys like Lafreniere, Corey Perry, who they signed in the offseason, step up into the top 6. Now they add Panarin, which is obviously a huge piece. But are you concerned? Like, I'll put it this way. Do you think that what they gave up helps them enough to get over that hump? And do you think that what they gave up is significant enough to say, well, if they don't get past the first round, is it really a big deal with the assets that they're parting ways with?
Well, I think giving up your first round pick who's close to being NHL ready is that signal that they want to win now. And again, like we've been mentioning, Kopitar's on his way out, Doughty's on his way out. They have an aging core and aging depth with guys like Armia and Perry. And then their goalie, Darcy Kemper, is 35 years old as well. So this is really a win now type of move. It's obviously not going to help them in the future since they're losing a prospect in Liam Greentree. But at the end of the day, they need to do something or they're just going to get bounced again by Edmonton in the first round. So I think when you acquire a guy like Artemi Panarin, he's obviously going to come in and make a big difference. But now I'm curious as to what the other players or how other players on LA are affected by this. What does this mean for Kevin Fiala? What does this mean for Quinton Byfield? What's their power play going to look like? I feel like you bring a guy in like Panarin and a lot of stuff starts to move around and change. And sometimes that's not a good thing. Obviously, he's going to help offensively, but we'll see what the implications are. In terms of the Rangers, I think this is actually a great move for them, even though they have to retain half his contract for the rest of the season. But finally, a guy like Lafreniere can be cemented on that first power play unit. And even if they move a couple more guys, they can finally start to build around a guy like him. Maybe time's up. I guess we'll see. But I think now this is when they start their rebuild, and you got to move on from your vet guys, whether that's Zibanejad, whether that's Trocheck. You get what you can. And, you know, they're bringing in a prospect here. It's not like it's a roster player. So this is really the rebuild time for the Rangers. So I like it on their end. For LA, I like it because you need to make a move. It is a bit of a desperation move, but at the end of the day, they're sitting there right at the cusp of a wild card spot. So hopefully this puts them over the hump. Do I think they still are able to beat the Oilers? I don't know. I think McDavid and Draisaitl are different in the playoffs. They're likely going to be facing the Oilers or Vegas Golden Knights in the first round because of how the seeding works. And acquiring Panarin doesn't make me think they're any better than those two teams. So your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. I think it's a desperation move by the Kings in the sense that it's something that they felt that they had to do and couldn't stay put going into the trade deadline. Because ultimately, if you're a Kings fan, if you look at this roster on paper, they've lost a lot more than they've gained over the last few seasons. They've had their main guys stay the same, but I guess you could say their supporting cast pieces have basically left. Just to put it bluntly. So to go in and get Panarin is obviously an addition. You're adding a ton of points. You're adding a guy that's been over point per game this season, who's a 90-point player, 90-point pace player this season with the Rangers, with a struggling Rangers team. He automatically inserts onto your top line and onto power play one. But the one thing that I question is Panarin. I don't know if you disagree, but I find that he's one of those players that you're going to really have to find the fit. You're going to have to find the guys that support him properly because he's not a play driver. He's a very, very, very skilled complementary piece, point getter. But I think that, the truth of the matter is that they're able to make this trade before the trade deadline, obviously, but well before it and before the break. They have a lot of time to figure out the proper line combinations and what's going to work going into the playoffs. But again, the issue is that, yes, they are a team that needed to make this type of move, but I'm also far from convinced that this team can even compete even after this move.
Do you think they even get past the first round with their current roster right now?
No, I don't. I think the truth of the matter is that the Oilers are way stronger. Again, if that's the matchup that it ends up being. But I think that the top heavy teams in the West are much better than the teams that are kind of in those wild card spots in the West as well. I mean, Again, Vegas, Edmonton, Colorado, Minnesota, Dallas, those 5 teams right there, I'm
you're taking over them.
Probably take any team in the wild card spots in 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, I agree.
The Kings sitting at 23, 17, and 14. A ton of OT losses there, which I realize, but I'm just not convinced that they can do it. But then again, it's better to try to make that type of move than to stand still and just accept defeat in the first round again.
Yeah. And I think we always have to bring this into the conversation, but in terms of the Montreal Canadiens perspective, I think we talked about this a couple episodes, and we said we were going to come back to this and say, why couldn't the Canadiens give this up or give that package up in order to get a guy like Panarin? In my opinion, I don't know if what the Canadiens could have offered would have gotten a deal done. You got to think Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon don't want to sell the house, give up a future whatsoever. And Liam Greentree, again, not an A-plus prospect, but a first-round pick, a guy who's still way over point per game in the OHL, was a World Junior player, obviously has some value to his name. If I'm from the Canadiens, like looking at it from the Canadiens' perspective, they're not exactly in a win-now mode. Their window is just starting to open, whereas the Kings is closing very fast. So if you were Ken Hughes, what would you give up in order to get Panarin if you wanted him? And what would that package look like?
Well, before I answer your question, I think the first thing to keep in mind is obviously the cap situation. The Canadiens have a very, very tight cap situation, and this is all before Patrick Laine, Alex Newhook come back from injuries, and all of a sudden there are going to have to be a couple roster moves that are made in order to make a trade or even just normal roster transactions work. So that's like the first thing to keep in mind. I also think the fact that Panarin went over to the Kings and immediately signed an extension based off the fact that that's where he wanted to play makes it a lot easier for the Kings, obviously, but also makes that transition very, very easy for Panarin because that's what he wanted. But if we were to throw those questions aside and say all things being equal on an equal level playing field and the cap space not being a factor, I think that the package that I would give up is probably, like a second and third round pick and maybe a B-level prospect. If that's I don't know if we consider Josh Roy a B-level prospect at this point in his career, or if you were willing to part ways with an unproven prospect like Zarovsky, which personally I wouldn't at this given time. But I think that if the Canadiens, like you mentioned, were in more of a contend now, this is our window. And if we don't do something now, that window is going to close. I wouldn't have a problem making that giving up that package for Panarin. But at this given moment, I don't think it makes a ton of sense.
I agree. So let's take a quick look. You mentioned it, but Artemi Panarin stats this season, 57 points in 52 games. Obviously coming into a roster with Anze Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, Kevin Fiala, Quinton Byfield. He is going to increase their scoring, which is exactly what they need at this moment. They're one of the strongest defensive teams in the NHL. They have a great goalie right now in Darcy Kemper. What are the implications for the players on the LA Kings? How is this going to help Adrian Kempe? What will his line look like in your opinion? Who's he going to end up playing with on a line?
I think it's a really tough question because I think the Kings have already struggled so mightily this season already to find the perfect line combinations. I mean, you've seen everything from Laferriere to Perry to Kuzmenko, who, in my honest opinion, is such a skilled player, but unfortunately, the coach doesn't trust him enough with significant minutes because defensively, he's not great. But with all that being said, I think that this, in my opinion, is the perfect opportunity to get a guy like Quinton Byfield going. Quinton Byfield is a guy that is able, with his size and speed, to dominate the neutral zone. He's also able to dominate the O zone with his size and speed. I think Panarin feeds well off a player who actually carries the pace of play. So I think Byfield at center would make a lot of sense. On the wing, I think you can throw in a bunch of different combinations, but I also think that another guy, and again, this is dependent on if they want to stack things, but I think that Kempe would also be a very good not complimentary, but a very good guy to throw on the wing in this case. I think you have Kempe and Byfield that carry a lot of the game with their speed and skill, whereas Panarin is more that, let me sit on the outside and wait for the defense to make a mistake. So I think that if you wanted to stack that line, the Kings would be in a very good spot. The issue is, Liam, and this is where I'm going to throw a question on to you, is then how do you create lines based off that first line if that were an option? Because I think that going from there, now you're a slim pickings. You have Kopitar, you have Fiala, Kuzmenko, Laferriere, Armia. I mean, again, these are guys that can all kind of play in different spots, but I'm not convinced that they can hold down a second line.
Yeah, I think when you have a player like Panarin, who's obviously God-given talent offensively, but very weak defensively, you need a defensive center. He's always had that with Mika Zibanejad or Vincent Trocheck. So I think he'll slot in pretty well with Anze Kopitar or Byfield, who are both pretty strong defensively. Kopitar, obviously, one of the stronger defensive players in the NHL. I wouldn't be surprised to see him and Kempe play the wings with Kopitar in the middle. So that first line, obviously elite. And then this opens the door for Fiala and Byfield to really establish that second line. I'm not sure who that other winger would be, whether it's Trevor Moore, who's also a strong defensive player that potentially can slot in next to Panarin. We'll see. But overall, that's a strong top six. I think no matter where he plays, he's going to create offense. And I think their power play that needs a lot of help right now will definitely have way more success. But will that be a 5-forward setup? Are they going to keep a guy like Brent Clark, who hasn't been amazing offensively or help that power play much? So lots of questions to be had here. But I like them going forward in terms of a fantasy perspective, and I like the upside of a lot of the LA Kings players now as well.
Before we close out the episode, I just wanted to mention something. I think what this trade really brings to light is not necessarily the aggressiveness or the commitment that the LA Kings are making to go out and making a push. What this speaks to the most is the fact that these teams like Tampa, like Florida, if you want to throw in Edmonton, even San Jose, which is it crazy to say that I think that the Sharks are in a better position to succeed this year than the Kings are? Like, I get it. The Kings have been in a more stable position for the last 5 years in comparison to the Sharks. The Sharks are making their way out of the basement, and they happen to be in a playoff spot right now or just outside of one this season, which makes them an interesting landing spot. But I think I rather the Sharks team on paper going into the playoffs than I do the Kings team. The Kings team definitely has a lot more experience. You can't deny that. But I think that the Sharks bring a different punch of energy, a different style of play that might throw off some of those stronger Western teams. I think that honestly, like I mentioned before, the LA Kings are a perfect matchup, or those top teams in the West are licking their chops at a matchup with the Kings, because I don't think that the Kings dominate in any facet of play. I really don't. Watching them play, I really don't think that they're that strong. And honestly, this season, I feel like they're significantly weaker than they've ever been. So with all that being said, I think this speaks a lot to why weren't those other teams willing to make moves, willing to give up maybe just one extra prospect? And again, this is all taking into consideration that Panarin did want to play in LA and had that full no move. So again, I guess my argument kind of is useless, but it's just so interesting to see what those other packages might have been for Panarin, barring the fact that he has that no move clause.
I think all in all, we can both agree that we're happy he's not in the Atlantic. Because that would have been bad. If Tampa got him, I don't know, if Detroit went out and got him, I mean, that is massive and can have a negative impact on the Canadiens. So I'm happy he's in the West. Makes the East a little bit weaker, even though the Rangers sucked already, but gives the Habs a better chance. And I think we can both be happy with that.
So we'll wrap it up with that for today, Liam. Obviously, we're reacting immediately to the news of the Panarin trade to the Kings. So it's always fun to be able to jump on and record this type of episode. But again, this will be on YouTube only. So for those of you listening that normally listen on Spotify, well, we'll direct you over to YouTube. But keep your eyes out for our next episode, where we're going to be chatting a little bit about the Olympics, the Montreal Canadiens players and their impacts on their respective teams at the Olympics in Italy. So thank you guys for tuning in as per usual, and we'll catch you guys next time.